practical teaching strategies for different learning preferences, the design of an effective introductory phase of a lesson, the design of an effective closure phase of a lesson, and how to critically examine the differences between informal and formal assessments. So there are 4 questions. You do need to research. You need to write an academic paragraph and an essay. Reference, you must reference everything that is not your own idea. And please, the word limits, the essay count, the maximum is 1,750. Okay, I'm not going to mark beyond that. Right, so question 1. A teacher at your school recently attended a workshop on multimodality in the classroom. She has subsequently designed a lesson to teach language structures and conventions to a grade 11 class. The lesson starts with a YouTube video. For the teaching and learning phase, she has designed a PowerPoint with graphics, words, and sound effects. She ends the lesson off with a Kahoot quiz. Okay, so number 1 is the theory question. Explain the importance of teachers understanding semiotic systems and using them to create multimodal lessons. So remember, semiotic systems semiotics refers to anything that is used to convey information. So if we look at, we can break it down into different semiotic systems. So visual, verbal, written, kinesthetic. All semiotics means is it used to convey information? So you do this all the time. You think about what visual you are going to put into your PowerPoint presentation, or what picture you are going to project for the students to see. You think about, what is this picture actually conveying? Colors are also part of semiotic systems because colors have different meanings and different connotations. Red we associate with urgency, passion, anger, love. Blue we associate with professionalism. Green we associate with nature or health. So we don't just put visuals and colors and words and sounds in for no good reason. We think about what each of those things mean. So you need to explain why it is important that you understand semiotics. So why you understand all of these things that need to be decoded, and how that is going to help you in producing a good lesson that uses multimodality effectively. Remember, we've spoken a lot about how we don't just put anything into our lessons. We use multimodality to convey a message. So for 5 marks, we're looking for 5 points on the importance of semiotics and how they're used in effective multimodal lessons. If you stop and think about it, it is very logical. I believe every single one of you is perfectly capable of answering this question with ease. It's a very logical, very straightforward points that we are looking for here. Then we go on to question 2. Now we're going back to this lesson that the teacher has designed. So if you were to sit in on that lesson, what would you say was successful? So 5 marks, 5 points. Then 1.3, explain the things you do not consider to be successful and how you could improve this lesson. So I'm going to give you a hint. This lesson does have aspects of it that are actually good and that are successful, but it is not a perfect lesson. There are plenty of things that could be improved upon. So you really want to consider, what would it be like to be in that class and what would you as a teacher do differently to improve it? Okay, so that's question 1. Question number 2. Each lesson plan involves 3 distinct phases: an introduction, a teaching, and a learning phase. Sorry, an introduction, a teaching and learning phase, and a conclusion. In an academically sound paragraph, explain the role of each of these phases and discuss important aspects that you as an educator should consider when designing each phase of a lesson. Refer to any research material using the Harvard IIE referencing system. So you are going to have to reference. However, this should not be a question that relies completely on what other people say. This is a question that you could probably answer without any outside references, but you are going to have to reference and do some research anyway. Now, as we mentioned last night, your references and your resources might not mention introduction, teaching and learning, and conclusion. They might say beginning, middle, and end. As long as it is clear that the beginning phase is and does the same thing as an introductory phase. The middle phase is clearly the teaching and learning phase, and the ending is clearly the conclusion. So if it uses different terminology, but clearly refers to the same things, that's absolutely fine. Now, you have to explain the role. So what is the point of an introduction? What is it meant to do? You don't just walk into a class and start teaching, you have an introduction. Why do you have an introduction? What role does the teaching and learning lesson phase play in the lesson? What is that phase meant to do? What is the conclusion meant to do? Now, if you were to sit down and think about it, I'm sure you could come up with those all by yourself. The second part is discuss important aspects that you as an educator should consider when designing each phase of a lesson. So when you draw up a lesson plan, you don't just write everything down without thinking about it. You actually think about what you're going to put in the introduction and why. So that is what we're looking for here. What are the things, and it's closely linked to the role. So what do I need to consider and what do I need to think about on a practical level in order to fulfill the role that this is meant to play in the lesson? So for example, in the introduction, one of the things you don't have to think about is assessment, because that's not the role of an introduction. The role of an introduction is to introduce the lesson. So what sort of things do you need to consider in order to make it a good introduction? What do you need to consider in order to make it a good teaching and learning phase? So essentially, what are the things you need to think about to make a good lesson? Okay. For question 3, this is very, very important. You must follow the instructions exactly. Okay, we've laid out exactly what you need to do. Please do not deviate. Okay, even if you've got a much better plan, a much better setup, doesn't matter, you still have to follow the setup. So you have been asked to design a resource for the grade 11 teachers to use to introduce poetry to their learners. So this is a general resource that all the teachers will use to introduce poetry to grade 11s. So you are required to choose a suitable application to create an original and interesting slideshow that will provide a general introduction to poetry conventions that will be suitable for grade 11s. So there are a lot of different applications you can use. You can use straightforward PowerPoint, you can use Canva. I'm sure there are a lot of different applications. Very, very important. You must include screenshots of your application, of your slideshow, I mean. You can include a link to the slideshow if it's got animations and sounds and things like that. Absolutely include a link. But links have tendencies to break. They have tendencies to expire. If you include screenshots, I can still mark your presentation. If the link is broken and I cannot see anything, I cannot give you marks for something I cannot see. So please include screenshots of the presentation. So first things first, an attractive cover slide that introduces the topic. Okay, so as beautiful as your cover slide is, it has to actually mention what this slideshow is about. Okay. Then a short video on the topic. So it's up to you to go and source a short video that introduces poetry. Then 2 to 3 slides. That's not 4 slides, it's not 5 slides, it's 2 to 3 slides that revise the basic conventions of poetry that FET English learners should understand. They are in grade 11. They have been doing poetry since primary school. They've been doing it intensely since grade 8. They should know the poetry conventions. So this is a reminder of the most important poetry conventions. So that is why you only have 2 to 3 slides to do this in, because you're not reteaching it, you're just setting up a reminder. Now think about attractive ways you could present it, because just having the word and then the convention and then an explanation, and then the next convention and an explanation can look very boring. So the most important thing is to get the information on the slide, but then once you've got all the information, do spend some time thinking about how you can make it look a bit attractive. Then you need to choose a suitable poem to use as an example to identify the basic conventions of poetry. Now, guys, play around with this. There are certain poems that are suggested by the government. You are not bound by those poems. You can choose your own poem. Now, when we say example to identify the basic conventions of poetry, what we mean is don't choose one of those 2-line poems. Yes, they can be beautiful, they can be effective, but they're not actually going to use a whole lot of poetry conventions. So you're looking for poems that have figurative language in it, for example. Doesn't need to have every single poetry convention. It's unlikely that you're going to find the perfect poem that has everything, but it must have the most important conventions. So Google things like grade 11 poems, poems suitable for grade 11 English home language learners, good poetry to teach grade 11 learners, anything like that. Just play around and use your judgment. Okay, you're all very intelligent. You wouldn't have gotten to this point in your education if you weren't. So you can judge if a poem is going to be a good poem to teach. Then, a short activity based on the content of the lesson. So the lesson is all about introducing poetry. You've got a poem. Now you design a short activity for the learners to do. So you can just do a basic worksheet. That's not terribly interesting. You can just have question 1, what is? Question 2, how do you? That's not a terribly interesting way. Have some fun with this. Yes, do a worksheet, but do a worksheet that's got interesting questions and interesting things for them to do. Things like group work, things like getting them to look at it from a different angle. You know, have some fun designing an activity that is firstly going to confirm and consolidate what they have learned about poetry, and second is actually interesting. Okay. Then an online quiz to recap the important concepts covered in the lesson. So this is your conclusion phase. This is where you consolidate what they have learned. Once again, I cannot emphasize this enough. You must please include screenshots. You can include the link, that's fine, but as I say, links break, links expire, especially to quizzes. Links to quizzes expire very quickly. So you don't want me to click on it and it goes, this quiz is not available, because if I can't see it, I can't mark it. So include the screenshots. And then finally, attend to best practices when designing a slideshow. What that means is, what makes a good slideshow? So you need to think about things like visuals, things like layout, things like background images. You don't want to do too much, but you don't want it to look boring. Is it easy to read? Are all the visuals that you have in your slideshow relevant to the information that you are conveying? So you've really got to look at your slideshow and go, is this a slideshow that is easy to use and read and understand? Is it an attractive slideshow? Has it been set out well? Does each slide have the information in a way that is easy to read and understand? Those are the sort of things you're looking at. If we go to the rubric quickly, so the content, number one, the content is thoughtful, thorough, and complete. The content covers all important aspects and contains no errors. So please don't make errors in what a metaphor is or what a simile is, okay? That's kind of a big problem if you're the one teaching it. So it's thoughtfully. So you've really thought it through. I can see that you put thought into this and you've covered everything we've asked for. And the content will enable the educator to teach poetry with ease, i.e., that slideshow can be emailed to every single teacher and every single teacher can easily use it. It's not a slideshow where you have to know what each slide means before you teach it. So it can't just have key words on it. Then every teacher is going to teach something differently. The poem provided is completely suitable. So it's suitable for grade 11s. It has poetry conventions in it, not too long, not too short. Okay, then the presentation is very original and interesting. The presentation makes excellent use of multimodality. So it has to be attractive. It has to be interesting. Yes, you can use templates, no problem, but add something to them, change them up a bit so it is original, so that I'm not looking at 50 of the same slideshow. But don't go too original that it actually doesn't make sense. So it's just a case of personalizing it. And then it makes excellent use of multimodality. So you've really thought about the words, the pictures, you've got animation, you've thought about why you are including every single element that you've included. What is its purpose? And then finally, the presentation contains an excellent example of the following elements. An attractive cover slide that introduces the topic, a short video on the topic, 2 to 3 slides that revise the basic conventions of poetry that FET English learners should understand. A suitable poem to use as an example to identify basic conventions of poetry. A short activity based on the content of the lesson. An online quiz to recap the important concepts of the lesson. You might realize that sounds familiar because it's exactly what the question asks you to do. So what we are doing is we're checking you've actually done every single element that you've been asked to do in the question. And that includes things like 2 to 3 slides, not 5 slides, not 6 slides on the convention. Okay, so that's question 3. Question 4 is the essay question. Guys, I want to remind you that as a springboard into your own ideas, and then you explain you use that as sort of the foundation, and then you build on it and explain it and provide your own ideas. Or else you provide your own ideas, you provide your own discussion, and then you use a source to back up what you're saying. So I'm not the only one who's saying this. Someone else who is some sort of authority agrees with me. So this is the scenario. During a conversation with another teacher after the June exams, this teacher discovers your students performed far better than hers did in the literature component of the exam. She asks you for help in finding ways to improve her students' performance, and during the course of your discussion, you find that she does not know what formative assessments are and has not been using them in her class. Okay, so formative assessments are any assessments that are used to assess how learning is going. So it is an assessment for learning. It can be a test. It can be just you walking around observing the class. Anything that lets you know how the students are doing. So you know how the students are doing, the students can see how they're doing, and you can provide feedback to help them improve. So, for example, these assignments are called formative assignments, the 4 marks, the formal assessments, the 4 marks. But what you do is you get each assignment back, you look at each assignment, you look at your marks, you consider what you did, you consider what you left out, and that then prepares you for the summative assessment. The summative assessment is the one that's at the end, it's the exam. By that point, it's too late. You know, that is the final assessment of all of your learning. So in the situation, the June exams are the summative. So everything in term 1 and 2 has led up to this June exam. But this teacher has not been using formative assessments along the way. So she hasn't been assessing the learners at various points to see how they're doing. What you have to do is write an academic essay between 1,500 words to 1,750 words, comprising both expository and discursive elements. Your essay should focus on the following. So I just want to point out expository means explaining, and discursive means to discuss. So you have to explain and you have to discuss, which means you have to use your own ideas. Please do not reference after every single sentence. That means that you've collated information. Doesn't mean that you have understood and internalized information. So your essay needs to focus on the following: the different types of assessments. Okay, so the 4 different types of assessments, you have to explain them. The role of assessments and feedback in teaching and learning. So why do we have assessments? Why do we have feedback? How does that help with teaching and learning? And then provide practical examples of assessments and feedback techniques that can be used in the FET classroom to improve learner performance. So you have to think about what you can do in your classroom to assess learners, to assess how they are learning, and what feedback you can provide them to help improve their learning. With this, the practical examples need to be specific. So you can't just generally say observation is a good technique to use because the teacher can provide feedback to all learners. Okay, that is far too generic. You need to explain how the observation would work, exactly what feedback you would give, how would you give it, why would you give it in that way? Okay. Use your own rationale to develop your discussion and exposition, adhering to principles of sound academic writing practices, commensurate with the level of academia. Ensure that you refer to credible research and publish source material to support your essay with reference to no less than 4 academic sources. The other thing, please do not write in such a way that it is almost impossible to read. I know you're going to read some journal articles where it seems they have gone out of their way to make it difficult to read in order to sound academic. That's not what you are aiming for. Your English needs to be formal, it needs to be correct, it does need to be academic, but it does need to be readable. So if you are sort of going out of your way to use really big words that are not words that we use in real life, you probably want to re-look at your style of writing. Has to be formal, has to be correct, but it also has to be readable. So don't try and make it sound like one of those journal articles that are just so dense and so difficult to read and get through. That is not what makes it academic. Okay, what makes it academic is it is formal, it is correct, you've used referencing, you've structured your essay properly. Okay, also please make sure you do structure your essay correctly. So you can choose the order, how you are going to look at these points. But please make sure that you look at one idea per paragraph and that your paragraphs have transitions so that there is a word or a phrase in the beginning of the paragraph or at the end of the previous paragraph to let the reader know that you are going on to another idea. Don't just abruptly change points because then the readers are going, oh, what? Oh, okay, we're talking about this now. Instead of having a transition to say, for example, formative assessments are not the only type of assessments. There are also summative assessments. Full stop, leave a line. Next paragraph, summative assessments are. Instead of just finishing talking about formative assessments, full stop, and then going on to summative. I'm like, okay, whoa, I thought we were talking about formative. So just having that little transition that says, okay, we're moving on to the next topic now, really helps the flow of your essay. Okay, I really hope that that has helped you. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Good luck and try as far as possible to enjoy doing this assessment. I know that sounds crazy, but the more you look at this as an exercise in preparing you for how you are going to teach. So designing your PowerPoint should be fun. This is your time to really show off what you would do in a lesson. So do try and have some fun with it. Try and see it as a tool that is going to really help you become the best teacher you can be.